Mirabelle Prescott did not plan to step between a wounded man and his attackers on a cold February morning. But the mail satchel across her shoulder felt like armor, and her voice cut through the mud-thick air before she could think better of it. "Stop right there." The two men in dark coats froze, hands still reaching for the stranger slumped against the hitching post outside the Iron Bend General Store. Blood soaked through his shirt at the shoulder, his face pale under wind-blown dark hair. But his eyes stayed sharp and dangerous, even as he sagged. The taller attacker turned toward her, annoyance flashing across his scarred face. "This does not concern you, miss. Best move along." Mirabelle tightened her grip on the mail satchel strap and did not move. She had carried mail through snowstorms and horse thieves, and men who thought a woman alone was easy prey, and she would not let this stranger be dragged off like a sack of grain. "I am a federal mail carrier," she said, keeping her voice steady. "That makes everything on this street my concern." The lie was thin but bold, and for one taut moment the attackers hesitated. The wounded man shifted, using the hitching post to pull himself straighter. His gaze locked on Mirabelle, surprise and something sharper flickering behind the pain. She saw the moment he decided to trust her interference, saw him gather what strength he had left. The shorter attacker reached for his belt, and Mirabelle stepped forward again, raising her voice so it carried to the storefront windows where faces had started to appear. "There are witnesses here. Whatever you think this man did, you take it to the sheriff, or you answer for assault in broad daylight." The taller man spat into the mud, disgust twisting his mouth. "You do not know what you are protecting, lady. That man is trouble you cannot afford." But he jerked his head at his partner, and they backed away, boots squelching in the cold muck. "We will see you again," the shorter one said to the wounded man. And then they turned and walked toward the edge of town, coats flapping. Mirabelle waited until they rounded the corner near the livery before she let herself breathe. The street was quiet, except for the distant clang of the blacksmith and the creak of a shop sign in the wind. She turned to the wounded man and found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You should see the doctor," she said. "That shoulder needs stitching." He pushed away from the hitching post, steadying himself with visible effort. "I appreciate what you did, but you should not have. Those men do not forget." Mirabelle felt a flash of irritation cut through her leftover fear. "I did not ask for your approval. I asked you to see the doctor." He almost smiled, a brief, dangerous curve that softened nothing in his face. "Mercer Keene. And you are the mail carrier everyone says is tougher than half the men in this territory." "Mirabelle Prescott," she said. "And I am every bit as tough, so do not test me. Now move, before you bleed out on my route." She walked with him to the doctor's narrow clapboard office, 2 streets over, acutely aware of the stairs tracking them from every window and doorway. Iron Bend was small enough that gossip traveled faster than the mail, and by sunset, everyone would know she had stepped between Mercer Keene and trouble. She did not know yet what that trouble was, but the tightness in her chest told her it mattered. The doctor, a graying man with tobacco-stained fingers, took one look at Mercer and pointed to the examination table without a word. Mirabelle lingered near the door, uncertain why she did not simply leave. Mercer glanced at her as the doctor cut away his shirt, and for a moment, their eyes held. She saw exhaustion behind the steadiness, and something deeper. Shame, maybe, or the weight of too many roads that led nowhere good. The wound was a knife graze, deep enough to bleed, but not fatal. The doctor worked in silence, stitching with swift competence while Mercer sat stone still. Mirabelle found herself studying him in the cold morning light slanting through the window. He looked like a man who had lived hard and expected nothing soft. But when he glanced at her again, there was gratitude in his face, raw and unguarded. The doctor finished, tied off the thread, and stepped back. "That will hold if you keep it clean and do not do anything stupid," he said. Mercer paid him with coins from a worn leather pouch and stood slowly. Mirabelle opened the door, expecting him to walk past her and disappear. But instead, he paused on the threshold. "I owe you," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You do not owe me anything. Just stay out of trouble." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "I wish it were that easy," he said. And then he walked out into the cold. 2 days later, Mercer walked into the post office, while Mirabelle was sorting the afternoon mail. She looked up, startled, and he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, like a man asking permission to enter. The bandage showed white under his open coat, and his face looked less pale but no less guarded. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "and to warn you. Those men work for a rancher named Doyle. He thinks I stole from him." Mirabelle set down the stack of envelopes, her pulse quickening. "Did you?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "No. But my brother did, and Doyle does not care about the difference." She studied him, weighing the honesty in his voice against the danger in his reputation. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you put yourself between me and them, and that makes you a target. You deserve to know what you stepped into." The post office was quiet, except for the creak of the building settling and the faint howl of wind under the eaves. Mirabelle crossed her arms, keeping the counter between them. "What does Doyle want?" Mercer turned his hat in his hands, a restless motion that spoke of too much unsaid weight. "My brother took a horse and some cash from his ranch 6 months ago. Doyle wants blood or money, and my brother is gone. So Doyle decided I will do." Mirabelle felt the injustice of it settle cold in her stomach. That is not law. That is revenge. Mercer's smile was bitter. Out here they are often the same thing. She wanted to argue, but she had seen enough of frontier justice to know he was right. "What will you do?" she asked. He met her eyes, and she saw the exhaustion there, the kind that came from running too long. "I do not know yet," he said, "but I will not let you get hurt because of me. Stay clear of me, Miss Prescott. It is safer that way." He turned to leave, and Mirabelle surprised herself by speaking before he reached the door. "I do not scare that easily," she said. Mercer stopped, glanced back. She saw something flicker in his face, a crack in the armor. "That might be the problem," he said quietly, and then he walked out into the brittle cold. Mirabelle stood alone in the empty post office, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up the mail again. She told herself it was anger, not the dangerous pull she had felt when he looked at her. She had built a life in Iron Bend on hard work and a spotless reputation, and getting tangled with a man like Mercer Keene was the fastest way to lose everything. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face in the doctor's office, the raw gratitude and shame, and she could not shake the certainty that he was telling the truth. The dust storm came 3 days later, roaring out of the northwest with almost no warning. Mirabelle was 2 miles outside town finishing her route when the sky turned the color of old brass and the wind hit like a fist. Her horse spooked, nearly throwing her, and she fought to keep the animal under control as the first blinding wave of dust rolled over them. She could barely see 5 feet ahead, could barely breathe through the grit choking the air. Then a hand grabbed her horse's bridle, and a voice shouted over the wind. "There is a line shack a quarter-mile south. We have to move now." She knew the voice before she could see his face through the swirling dust. Mercer appeared out of the storm like a ghost, his coat whipping around him, his eyes streaming but locked on hers with fierce clarity. She did not argue. They ran. The line shack was a leaning structure of weathered wood and patched tar paper, barely standing, but solid enough to block the worst of the wind. Mercer hauled the door open and pulled both horses inside, Mirabelle stumbling after them. He slammed the door and dropped the latch, and for a moment they stood gasping in the sudden dim quiet, dust coating their skin and clothes. The storm howled outside, shaking the walls, but inside the air was close and still. Mirabelle coughed, wiping grit from her eyes. Her mail satchel hung heavy and dusty across her shoulder, and her dress was caked with dirt. Mercer moved to the single-shuttered window, checking the latch. "That storm will blow for hours," he said. "We are stuck here until it passes." She nodded, too shaken to be embarrassed by the forced intimacy. "How did you find me?" He glanced at her, something unreadable in his face. "I saw the storm coming and knew you would be out on your route. I rode out to warn you." The line shack was sparse, a rough bench along one wall, a stack of old horse blankets in the corner, a rusted stove with no wood. Mercer spread one of the blankets over the dirt floor and gestured for her to sit. Mirabelle lowered herself carefully, every muscle tight with cold and adrenaline. He sat across from her, far enough to be respectful, close enough that she could see the dust streaked across his face and the weariness in his eyes. "Why did you come after me?" she asked. He looked down at his hands, scarred and work-rough. "Because I owe you," he said, "and because I could not stand the thought of you getting caught out here alone." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "You do not owe me anything," she said again, but this time it sounded hollow even to her. They sat in silence while the storm raged. Gradually the tension eased into something else, something quieter and more dangerous. Mercer told her about Larkspur Ranch, where he worked mending fences and breaking horses. He told her about his brother, reckless and charming and gone, leaving debts and enemies behind. He did not say the name of the family his brother ran with, but Mirabelle heard the weight of it in his voice, the shame of blood ties he could not escape. She told him about the post office, about the satisfaction of delivering mail no matter the weather or distance, about the way people trusted her because she never failed them. She did not tell him about the loneliness, but she suspected he heard it anyway. The light shifted outside, the storm's fury easing into a steady howl. Mirabelle found herself watching the way Mercer moved, careful and contained, like a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Starting over somewhere no one knows your name?" He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Every day," he said. "But running does not change what you carry." She nodded slowly. "I used to think if I worked hard enough and followed every rule, I could build something solid, something no one could take away. And now I am not sure that is enough." The words came out quieter than she intended, and she saw him hear the truth beneath them. Mercer leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "You are the strongest person I have met in this territory, Miss Prescott. Do not let anyone make you doubt that." The way he said it, steady and certain, made heat rise in her face. She looked away, her heart beating too fast. "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know what I saw when you stepped between me and those men. That takes more than strength. That takes belief." She met his eyes again, and the space between them felt charged, fragile. Outside the storm howled, but inside the line shack the air was warm, with shared breath, and something neither of them dared name. When the storm finally broke, the sky outside was clear and cold, stars beginning to prick through the twilight. Mercer opened the door, and the clean air rushed in, sharp and bracing. They saddled the horses in silence, the intimacy of the last few hours settling into something unspoken and heavy. Mirabelle swung into the saddle, her body aching and her mind racing. Mercer mounted beside her, his face unreadable in the dusk. They rode back toward Iron Bend together, not speaking, the distance between their horses carefully maintained. But when they reached the edge of town and the lights of the post office came into view, Mercer reined in. Mirabelle stopped beside him, waiting. "I meant what I said in there," he told her. "You should stay clear of me. But I cannot promise I will stay clear of you." She looked at him, her pulse loud in her ears. "Then do not make promises you cannot keep," she said, and urged her horse forward before he could answer. The trouble started 2 days later, when Sheriff Holloway came into the post office with a grim face and a warrant in his hand. Mirabelle looked up from sorting the morning mail and felt her stomach drop. The sheriff was a decent man, tired and overworked, and he did not meet her eyes. "I need to ask you some questions about Mercer Keene," he said. She straightened, keeping her voice calm. "What kind of questions?" Holloway set the warrant on the counter. Doyle filed a complaint. "Says Keene stole a horse and assaulted one of his men. Says you were seen with him during the storm, and he is asking questions about whether you helped him hide stolen property." The accusation hit like a slap. "That is a lie," Mirabelle said, her voice sharp. "I was caught in a dust storm and he helped me reach shelter. There was no stolen horse and no crime." Holloway nodded slowly, but his expression stayed troubled. "I believe you, Miss Prescott. But Doyle has influence, and he is pushing hard. He wants Keene arrested, and he is willing to drag your name through the mud to make it happen." Mirabelle felt cold fury rise in her chest. This is about revenge, not justice. Doyle wants to punish Mercer for something his brother did. The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I know, but unless I can prove Doyle is lying, I have to bring Keene in. And if you are seen defending him, Doyle will make sure everyone in this territory believes you are part of whatever trouble he is selling." She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "So you want me to stay silent and let an innocent man be arrested?" Holloway's face hardened. "I want you to be smart. You have built a good life here. Do not throw it away for a man you barely know." Mirabelle went to the sheriff's office that afternoon and found Mercer already in chains. He stood between two deputies, his face hard and his eyes locked on the floor. When he saw her in the doorway, he flinched, a flash of something raw crossing his face. "You should not be here," he said. She ignored him and turned to the sheriff. What evidence do you have? Holloway gestured to a saddle and bridle piled in the corner. Doyle's men found these at the Larkspur Ranch bunkhouse. They say it matches the stolen horse. Mirabelle looked at the tack, then at Mercer. He shook his head slightly. A warning. That saddle belongs to the ranch, he said quietly. Anyone who works there uses it. Doyle knows that. This is a setup. The sheriff looked tired and angry. Maybe it is. But I cannot ignore evidence, even if it smells wrong. Mirabelle felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The choice sharp and clear. She could walk away, protect her reputation, keep the life she had built. Or she could fight for a man she barely knew. A man whose past was tangled with outlaws and blood debts. She thought of the line shack, of the honesty in his voice when he told her running did not change what you carried. She thought of the way he had ridden into a dust storm to find her. I was with him the day Doyle claims the horse was stolen, she said. We were caught in the storm and sheltered together for hours. He could not have taken anything. Holloway's eyes narrowed. You are willing to testify to that? Yes, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I am. Mercer looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between gratitude and despair. You do not know what you just did, he said quietly. She turned to him, ignoring the deputies and the sheriff. I know exactly what I did. And I would do it again. The sheriff exhaled slowly. All right, I will note your statement. But Doyle is not going to let this go, and neither of you is going to come out of this clean. Mirabelle lifted her chin. Then we will face it together. Holloway shook his head, but there was a flicker of respect in his tired eyes. You are a stubborn woman, Miss Prescott. Let us hope that is enough. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Doyle spread rumors through Iron Bend like poison, suggesting Mirabelle was involved with stolen property and worse, that she had compromised herself with a man tied to outlaws. People who had trusted her for years started avoiding her eyes in the street. The postmaster called her into his office and told her quietly that if the scandal continued, he might have no choice but to replace her. Mirabelle kept her head high and did her job, delivering mail with the same fierce precision she always had. But at night, alone in her small rented room, she felt the weight of it pressing down. She had gambled everything on a man she barely knew, and the cost was rising every day. She saw Mercer only once during those 2 weeks, when the sheriff allowed her to visit the jail. He sat on the narrow cot in his cell, his face gaunt and his eyes shadowed. You should not have done this, he said as soon as the deputy left them alone. Mirabelle gripped the bars, her voice low and fierce. Do not tell me what I should have done. I made my choice. He stood and crossed to the bars, close enough that she could see the anguish in his face. You do not understand. My brother was not just a thief. He ran with the Taggart gang. That makes me guilty by blood in most people's eyes, no matter what the truth is. The name hit her like cold water. The Taggart gang was notorious. Outlaws who had terrorized 3 territories before disappearing into legend. If Mercer's brother had been one of them, then the stain went deeper than she had imagined. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Does that change what happened? Does it make Doyle's lies true? No, he said quietly. But it means you tied yourself to a man everyone will assume is guilty. It means you will lose everything, and I cannot give you anything in return. Mirabelle felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. You already gave me something. You showed me that love can be worth the risk. He stared at her, shock and something deeper breaking across his face. You do not even know me, he said, his voice rough. I know enough, she said, and I am not walking away. His hand came up to grip the bar beside hers, their fingers almost touching. If we survive this, he said quietly, I will spend the rest of my life proving you were right to trust me. She smiled, small and fierce. Then let us make sure we survive. The hearing came on a cold March morning in the town hall, which served as the circuit court when the judge rode through. The room was packed, every bench filled with townspeople eager to see the scandal play out. Mirabelle sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. Mercer sat at the defendant's table in shackles, his face carefully blank. Doyle sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man from the territorial capital. The judge, a white-haired man with a reputation for fairness, called the court to order, and the room fell silent. Doyle's lawyer stood and laid out the case with smooth confidence. Stolen horse, evidence found at the defendant's residence, a pattern of criminal association through family ties. He painted Mercer as a dangerous man who had charmed a naive woman into providing a false alibi. When it was time for Mirabelle to testify, she walked to the witness stand with her head high. The lawyer circled her like a predator, asking pointed questions about the storm, the line shack, the hours she spent alone with Mercer. He suggested she had been coerced, or worse, that she had willingly involved herself in criminal activity out of misplaced affection. Mirabelle answered every question with calm precision, refusing to be rattled. I was caught in a dust storm. Mercer Keene found me and brought me to shelter. We waited out the storm and returned to town. There was no stolen horse and no crime. The lawyer leaned in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Miss Prescott, are you aware that the defendant's brother was a member of the Taggart gang? Yes, she said. Are you aware that makes the defendant a man of questionable character? I am aware, she said steadily, that a man is not responsible for his brother's crimes. And I am aware that Mercer Keene has done nothing but work honestly and try to build a decent life. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Doyle's lawyer tried another angle, but Mirabelle held firm. When she finally stepped down, her legs were shaking, but her voice had never wavered. She met Mercer's eyes as she walked back to her seat, and she saw something in his face that made her chest ache. Pride and love and a determination that matched her own. The judge called for closing arguments, and the room fell silent again. Doyle's lawyer painted a picture of conspiracy and deception. The defense, a tired local attorney who had taken the case for almost no fee, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, and the accusations were driven by personal vendetta. Then, the judge looked at Mercer. Do you have anything to say in your own defense? Mercer stood slowly, the chains on his wrists clinking. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the courtroom. I have spent my whole life trying to escape my brother's shadow. I have worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to be a man worth something. I did not steal from Doyle. I did not assault his men. And I did not drag Miss Prescott into this. She chose to stand by me, and that is the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do." He paused, his gaze shifting to Mirabel. "She has risked everything for the truth, and if this court has any integrity, you will not punish her for that." The judge studied him for a long moment, then looked at Doyle. "You have anything to add?" Doyle stood, his face hard. "That man's brother stole from me and humiliated me. I want justice." The judge's expression did not change. "This court deals in law, not revenge. Sit down." The judge reviewed the evidence in silence, flipping through papers and frowning. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he looked up. "The evidence presented is insufficient to convict. The saddle and bridle could have been used by anyone at Larkspur Ranch, and the timeline presented by Miss Prescott creates reasonable doubt about the defendant's involvement. Charges are dismissed." The courtroom exploded. Doyle surged to his feet, shouting, but the judge banged his gavel hard. "Order. This case is closed. If you have new evidence, bring it to me properly. Otherwise, you are done here." Mercer sagged in his chair, the deputy moving to unlock his shackles. Mirabel felt tears sting her eyes, relief crashing over her so hard she could barely breathe. Outside the courthouse, Mirabel and Mercer stood on the steps in the cold golden light of late afternoon. The crowd dispersed around them, some people glaring, others nodding with grudging respect. Mercer turned to her, his face raw with exhaustion and something deeper. "You saved my life in there," he said. She shook her head. "I told the truth. That is all." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. "It was more than that. You chose me when no one else would. You stood up in front of everyone and said I was worth believing. I do not know how to repay that." "You do not have to," she said quietly. "Just do not waste it." He smiled, small and real. "I will not," he promised. They walked together down the main street, ignoring the stares and whispers. When they reached the post office, Mercer stopped. "I need to leave Iron Bend," he said. "Doyle will not forgive this, and staying here puts you in more danger." Mirabel felt her heart clench. "Where will you go?" "I do not know yet. Somewhere I can start clean." He looked at her, his eyes steady and full of things he could not say. "Come with me," he said quietly. She stared at him, the offer hanging between them like a held breath. "I have a life here," she said. "A job, a reputation, or what is left of one." He nodded, pain flickering across his face. "I know. I should not have asked." But Mirabel was already thinking, already weighing. She had fought so hard to build something solid, something no one could take away. But the scandal had taught her that nothing was truly safe, that reputation could be stripped away in a moment. And standing here with Mercer, she realized she did not want safety. She wanted the man who had ridden into a storm for her. She wanted the risk and the hope and the chance to build something new. "I will come with you," she said. His eyes widened, shock and hope flooding his face. "Mirabel, you do not have to." "I want to," she said. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life wondering what I gave up, because I was afraid." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the smell of wool and cold air and the solid warmth of him. When they pulled apart, he cupped her face in his hands. "I will build you a life worth leaving for," he said. "I promise." She smiled through her tears. "We will build it together." They boarded the westbound train that evening, leaving Iron Bend behind as the sun set over the prairie. Mirabelle watched the town disappear into the distance and felt no regret, only the fierce, bright certainty that she had chosen right. They settled in a valley 200 miles west, in a town called Fairhope, where no one knew their names or their past. Mercer found work at a cattle ranch, and Mirabelle took a job at the general store, sorting inventory and keeping books. It was not the life she had planned, but it was theirs, built on honesty and shared risk. In the evenings, they sat on the porch of the small house they rented and watched the sun set over the mountains. Mercer told her stories about the horses he worked with, and Mirabelle read him letters from the few people back in Iron Bend who had stayed loyal. Slowly, carefully, they built trust into something deeper. They learned each other's rhythms, the silences and the small gestures that meant home. 6 months after they left Iron Bend, Mercer asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the fire after supper, the house warm and quiet around them. He did not have a ring, but he took her hand and spoke with the same raw honesty he had shown in the courtroom. "I know I am not what you planned for. I know I brought you scandal and danger and a life that is harder than what you had. But I love you, Mirabelle. I have loved you since the moment you stepped between me and those men, and I will spend every day proving you were right to choose me. Will you marry me?" She looked at him, at the steady strength in his face and the vulnerability in his eyes, and she felt the last piece of fear fall away. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." And then she kissed him, fierce and sure, and felt him smile against her mouth. They married in the spring, in a small church with wildflowers on the altar and a handful of new friends as witnesses. Mirabelle wore a simple white dress she sewed herself, and Mercer stood beside her in his best shirt, his hand steady on hers as they spoke their vows. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Mercer kissed her, the small congregation broke into applause. Afterward, they walked through town together, hand in hand, and Mirabelle felt a joy so complete it made her breathless. She had risked everything for this man, and he had given her a life built on trust and love, and the kind of courage that mattered. That evening, they stood on the porch of their home and watched the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Mercer pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving everything behind?" Mirabelle leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. "Not for a moment," she said. "This is where I was meant to be." He turned her in his arms and kissed her forehead, then her lips, soft and lingering. "I will never stop being grateful you chose me," he said. She smiled up at him, her heart full. "I will never stop choosing you," she promised. And as the stars began to appear overhead, they stood together in the gathering dusk, two people who had risked everything for love and found a home in each other.